Anyway, that's the big picture of the world. Get through all, get through the surgery. I need
Outside of Little Rock.
Good. Welcome to the second week of Is God Good? In case it wasn't painful obvious, I don't have a voice today, so I ask that you bear with me as we talk. And hopefully it is not the oration of this class that you need, but rather the content of the class. Is this just like living with 3 small children? They get a bunch of stuff and then their voice goes away. Fortunately, I feel fine, although it doesn't sound like I feel fine, but I do. I really feel fine. And Jesse says that this will teach me to slow down and enunciate my words. So it could be a really good thing, especially for Elaine, who says I do not enunciate, which is true. It's always good to get constructive criticism.
It's good to be called out.
And that's the danger of criticism. Well, I'm glad to see that you're back this week. I'm glad to see that I didn't scare you off, although part of me thinks that I should have scared you off. But this week, we're going to take a step back for a minute. And most of this class is on the topic of God's goodness. And is God good in the context of pain, suffering, and in the context of the Bible, which sometimes seems like God does stuff that doesn't seem good. So to get at this question, I think it's important to take a step back and examine the worldview that we're coming from. Because the question of goodness and is God good, and the problem of evil is not the question that is exclusive to Christianity. Actually, every worldview has to deal with the problem of evil. Now, it becomes relatively acute when we talk about Christianity, because Christianity makes a strong claim that God is good. But regardless of your worldview, every worldview has to deal with the problem of evil. It has once been said, I've heard before, that if the problem of evil was just in your mind, then you could solve it tomorrow just by thinking differently. But we all know, as we feel suffering, as we feel evil, we know that it's a real thing in the world. So today we're going to take a step back and ask, whose problem is it? Now, we're going to examine the problem mostly in the context of Christianity versus atheism. And that's because we are Westerners, we live in America. And that is usually the context in which this question is posed. There's a whole other question of how other religions deal with the problem of evil. We're not really going to discuss that today, because I think you are more likely to encounter a strong critical atheist than you are a strong critical Buddhist, unless you are a missionary in like Asia. So, and if you don't know, this QR code will take you to the Google Classroom, which I will post resources and videos and notes. So if you want to point your phone at that QR code, you can join the classroom and keep up with everything that we're doing in this class. There's part of me that feels like Paul this morning, where he says that he had a thorn in the flesh, and part of it was he was not a good orator. Well, that might be part of it. So we will let the grace of God carry us this morning. But to begin with, I've asked Rob to read a parable for us.
The madman. Have you not heard of that madman who lit a lantern in the bright morning hours, ran to the marketplace, and cried incessantly, "I seek God! I seek God!" As many of those who did not believe in God were standing around just then, he provoked much laughter. "Has he got lost?" asked one. "Did he lose his way like a child?" asked another. "Or is he hiding? Is he afraid of us? Has he gone on a voyage? Emigrated?" Thus they yelled and laughed. The madman jumped into their midst and pierced them with his eyes. "Whither is God?" he cried. "I will tell you, we have killed him, you and I. All of us are his murderers. But how did we do this? How could we drink up the sea? Who gave us the sponge to wipe away the entire horizon? What were we doing when we unchained this earth from its sun? Whither is it moving now? Whither are we moving? Away from all suns? Are we not plunging continually? Backward, sideward, forward in all directions. Is there still any up or down? Are we not straying as though an infinite nothing? Do we not feel the breath of empty space? Has it not become colder? Is it not continually closing in on us? Do we not need to light lanterns in the morning? Do we hear nothing as yet of the noise of the grave diggers who are burying God? Do we smell nothing as yet of the divine decomposition? Gods too decompose. God is dead. God remains dead. And we have killed him. How shall we comfort ourselves, the murderers of all murderers? What was holiest and mightiest of all that the world has yet owned has bled us to death, has bled to death under our knives? Who will wipe this blood off us? What wonder is there for us to clean ourselves? What festivals of atonement, what sacred games shall we have to invent? Is not the greatness of this deed too great for us? Must we ourselves not become gods simply to appear worthy of it? There has never been a greater deed, and whoever is born after us, for the sake of this deed, he will belong to a higher history than all history hitherto. Here the madman fell silent and looked again at his listeners, and they too were silent and stared at him in astonishment. At last he threw his lantern on the ground, and it broke into pieces and went out. "I've come too early," he said to them. "My time is not yet. This tremendous event is still on its way, still wandering. It has not yet reached the ears of men. Lightning and thunder require time. The light of the stars requires time. Deeds, though done, still require time to be seen and heard. This deed is still more distant from them than most distant stars, and yet they have done it themselves." It has been related further that on the same day the madman forced his way into several churches, and there struck his Requiem Aeterna Deo, led out and called to account. He is said always to have replied nothing but, "What, after all, are these churches now, if they are not the tombs and sepulchres of God?"
Thanks, Rob. A little bit of nihilism for you in the morning. never hurt nobody, right? So, whose problem is it anyway? Nietzsche was a philosopher in the 1800s. He's very famous for being the father of nihilism. And nihilism means that nothing actually matters. And that's what we're going to explore this morning. Because when you separate morality, when you separate any kind of meaning from God, you lose all your foundation. And ultimately, everything is meaningless. So when we ask the question, whose problem is it? We're saying, whose problem is the problem of evil? Because everybody has to answer that question. Whether you're an atheist, whether you're a Christian, whether you don't know what you are, you have to answer this question because evil exists. Or at least it feels like evil exists. And in our perceptions and in our minds, evil exists. And if you feel the problem acutely, if you are mad at God for the problem of evil, you too have to answer this question. So there's a movie called The Sunset Limited. Great movie. Very heavy movie. It's not a feel-good movie. Maybe not a movie to watch with your kids. But it is a wonderful movie because the whole movie is this question of nihilism versus theism, specifically Christianity. And it's really cool because the movie starts in this rundown apartment, and Tommy Lee Jones and Samuel L. Jackson walk in, and they're just having a conversation. And you start to learn why they're having a conversation as the movie progresses. But you get about 10 to 15 minutes into the movie, and you think, wait a minute, is this whole movie going to be set in this one apartment room? And spoiler alert, it is. The whole movie in this one apartment room, on this table, and these two men just talking. And their conversation is profound. Because the question is profound. Because if you don't believe in God, ultimately, you can't believe in anything. And that is what I'm going to try to convince you of today. You don't have to believe me right now, but I'm going to try to convince you of it today. This is actually a novel. If you want to read it, I read it yesterday as I was driving a long way. I listened to the whole thing, and I loved it. Yeah. It's called The Sunset Limited. Yeah, I think I have it on the back page, but I'm not sure. Great movie, heavy, very heavy movie. Don't watch it if you're not doing it in a good mood. So many of you have probably heard about the New Atheism and the four horsemen of the New Atheism, which is Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, Christopher Hitchens, and Daniel Dennett. The New Atheism started around 2006 when Richard Dawkins published The God Delusion. And it really took off and kind of was very popular for about 18 years, 8 years, 12 years, some finite period of time. And today, the New Atheism has waned. It's not very popular anymore. And we'll talk about why that might be. But for a while, the New Atheism was very popular. And there was a lot of, especially younger people who were very outspoken against Christianity and other religions in general. But since this was a Western movement, it was largely against Christianity. And these were militant atheists. They were heavy critics. But Richard Dawkins is an evolutionary biologist. He wrote The Selfish Gene. And his worldview is materialistic, which means there is nothing beyond the material realm. So he writes a quote like this. I'm not going to read the whole quote. But ultimately he says, the universe that we observe has precisely the properties that we should expect if there is, at bottom, no purpose, no design, no evil, no good, nothing but pitiless indifference. And that kind of became a phrase for Dawkins. Nothing but pitiless indifference. then he would turn around and say stuff like this. Let us try to teach generosity and altruism because we are born selfish. Let us understand what our own selfish genes are up to because we may then at least have the chance to upset our designs, something that no other species has aspired to do. And then he would say stuff like this. We should not need policing, whether by God or by each other, in order to be good. We should be good for the sake of goodness, and because it makes the world a better place for all of us. So here's a man with a completely materialistic worldview. He says, what we observe in the universe is what we would expect if there was no good, no evil, no desire, no nothing but pitiless indifference. And then he turns around and says, but we should be nice anyway. This is another example that I think really hits the nail on the head of the point that I'm trying to make. And I've asked Steve to read this one for us.
Look again at that dot. That's here, that's home, that's us. On it, everyone you love, everyone you know, everyone you ever heard of, every human being who ever was, lived out their lives. The aggregate of our joy and suffering, thousands of confident religions, ideologies, and economic doctrines, every hunter and forager, every hero and coward, every creator and destroyer of civilization, every king and peasant, every young couple in love, every mother and father, hopeful child, inventor and explorer, every teacher of morals, every corrupt politician, every superstar, every supreme leader, every saint and sinner in the history of our species lived there on a mote of dust suspended in a sunbeam. The earth is a very small stage in a vast cosmic arena. Think of the rivers of blood spilled by all those generals and emperors so that in glory and triumph they could become the momentary masters of a fraction of a dot. Think of the endless cruelties visited by the inhabitants of one corner of this pixel on the scarcely distinguishable inhabitants of some other corner, how frequent their misunderstandings, how eager they are to kill one another, how fervent their hatreds. Our posturings, our imagined self-importance, the delusion that we have some privileged position in the universe, are challenged by this point of pale light. Our planet is a lonely speck in the great enveloping cosmic dark. In our obscurity, in all this vastness, there is no hint that help will come from elsewhere to save us from ourselves. The earth is the only world known so far to harbor life. There is nowhere else, at least in the near future, to which our species can migrate. Visit, yes, settle, not yet. Like it or not, for the moment, the earth is where we make our stand. It has been said that astronomy is a humbling and character-building experience. There is perhaps no better demonstration of the folly of human conceits than this distant image of our tiny world. To me, it underscores our responsibility to deal more kindly with one another and to preserve and cherish the pale blue dot, the only home you've ever known.
Thanks, Steve. Are you feeling cheery? That's happy. So this is Carl Sagan, and he famously looks at this picture of a pale blue dot. This is taken from this satellite Voyager as it's 4 million miles away from Earth, and it turns its camera back towards Earth, and it takes this one little picture of this tiny speck of dust suspended in a sunbeam. And Carl Sagan says, that's us. That's how tiny, how insignificant. Our lives feel so significant. But when you back up, when you look at the cosmos, that's all we are. Everything that we've ever done, every person we have ever known, every war that has ever been fought, every blood that has ever been shed on that one speck of dot. So he gives you this really bleak picture. And then he turns around and says, so we should probably be kind and responsible. Do you start to feel the disconnect there? Because if you are a materialist, if you truly believe that there is nothing beyond the material world, to turn around and say, so we should probably be kind to one another, is patently ridiculous. Because when you think about it, in 10 billion years, or however long it takes, when the human race is gone, when the universe has expanded, when there's nothing but the cold death of everything, it will not matter if you were nice. It will not matter if you were Hitler. It will not matter if you killed 3,000 people or saved 3,000 people. If there is nothing beyond this life, there's nothing beyond the material universe, then ultimately, nothing matters, because we will all die, the human race will all die, and the atrocities of the human race will be no more. And we could be the best people that you have ever, we could make it to where our society flourishes, where we have the best life that we could ever dream of, that we help everybody, that nobody goes poor, nobody goes sick. But ultimately, in the heat death of the universe, everybody's dead. And it doesn't matter if you're good or evil or bad. And that's what Richard Dawkins says at the beginning. He says, our universe is what we would expect if there was no good, no design, no evil, no nothing, just blind, pitiless indifference. The reason we started with Nietzsche this morning is Nietzsche is one of the few philosophers who has taken materialism to its logical conclusion. Nietzsche was the father of nihilism because he understood that when you kill God, there is nothing else. So all that there is now. And all these morals, all these values that we have because we live in a Christianized society are just a lingering aspect of for when we thought God was alive. And the madman, he rages into the city and he gives his whole speech, and everybody just looks at him. Because the idea is, you can be good without God. And they look at this madman because he's crazy, and he says, I've come too early. You are still going on the embers of Christianity. Now, I'm making some pretty strong claims here. But this is not just a lot of philosophers, a lot of people who've been thinking about this a long time, have realized that our values, the reason why we think that we can be good apart from an ultimate lawgiver, is solely because the air we breathe is Christianity. And it's hard to understand that. It's like we are a fish in water. The fish doesn't know what water is. It's just swimming in the water, right? Because it's so saturated that we take it for granted that every life is valuable. We take it for granted that the weak, we should help the weak and marginalized. We take it for granted that we should have compassion upon those who need to have compassion. But the question is, are these moral values self-evident? Famously, Thomas Edison, in our Declaration of Independence, he says, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and are endowed by the Creator with certain inalienable rights. But the question is, are these truths self-evident? And the answer, when you look at history, is resounding that it's self-evident to us because we are molded and shaped by the values of the Judeo-Christian worldview. But before that worldview, when you look at Rome, Rome did not have those values. If you told a Roman citizen that all life was of equal moral value, they would have laughed in your face. Because it is patently obvious that all life is not of equal moral value. They would say that there's a hierarchy of people. There are people who are very important, and there are people who are not important at all. You have the emperor, you have the statesman, you have people of high rank, you have men in particular who are higher ranked than women, free men over slaves. It is very clear to them that all people are not of equal value. if you tell the Roman citizen that they should really stop crucifying people because that's a really terrible way to treat somebody, they would laugh in your face. Because this is a world where the strong dominate, and might makes right. So whoever's in charge is who has the most power. And again, it is patently obvious to them. It's self-evident to the Romans that this is the way the world works. If you told a Roman that you really shouldn't just let a child die because there was some defect in them, or because they were a woman, you can literally go back and read the Greek and Roman philosophers who say, if you have a child that's not worth raising, expose them. And the practice of exposure was a common thing in Rome, where a baby was born, and they would literally leave the baby out to die because there was some defect in them, or just because there was a woman, there was a girl. And famously, the Christians would go out in the trash heaps and retrieve these children to save them, to raise them, because this practice was widespread in the Roman world. If you ask anybody in the ancient world, if you told them that slavery, that you should not own a person, they would laugh in your face. Because this is the way the world is. In every culture in history, slavery was a part of that culture, especially in the Roman world. We often, because of the history of American slavery, which is a dark, dark stain, we think it's an our problem. But really, today, where we have abolished slavery, is actually the unique, that we're living in a very, very unique time in world history, where slavery is repulsive. Because before the abolitionist movement, slavery was a part of life, and no one questioned it. No one except for famous Christian thought leaders throughout the years. So our moral values, it is plain to see that our moral values, what we think of as right or wrong, what we think about other people, are not self-evident. So here's some of the morality that we take for granted. We take the dignity and worth of every individual. I bet you can guess where that came from. Human rights. The whole concept of human rights is laughable outside of a Christian moral framework, or Judeo-Christian moral framework. Equality and democracy. Compassion and care for the weak. Forgiveness. Forgiveness was not really a thing in ancient Rome. And even the value of consent. So if you were a Roman, especially a Roman male, high-ranking male, it was taken for granted that your privilege allowed you to do whatever you want with someone who was of lower status than you. And that's male or female, but particularly females. And the idea of consent is a very Christian idea. If you remember in 1 Corinthians 7, where Paul says, your body is not your own, like the body of the husband belongs to the wife, the body of the wife belongs to the husband. The phrase that the body of the wife belongs to the husband, that would have been readily accepted in their culture. That would have been like, everybody said, yeah. But to say that the body of the husband belongs to the wife would have been insane in their culture. Just completely radical. And because there was no idea of consent. There was no idea of treating people fairly. And the reason I'm painting this picture is to get to the point that our morality is not self-evident. It's self-evident to us because of the culture that we live in. But it's not self-evident. So this is a little cartoon that I like. It pokes a little bit of fun, especially as like secular humanism. But the 2,000 years of the Christian worldview has dragged up Western ethics. And then we get to this place where we are becoming increasingly post-Christian. And the secular ethicists would say, see, we're doing just fine on our own. If we can loose our shackles of religion, loose the shackles of Christianity. And everybody is basically good. Everybody, we can all agree that we can just treat people with equality and dignity and respect. And the fact is, that might be true right now, where the majority of people in society hold to those values. But as we get more and more severed from the foundation that grounds those values, less and less people will see those values as self-evident. And this is the parable of the madman. This is what Nietzsche said in the 1800s. He said, I've come too early, because eventually it's all going to crumble. Steve, would you mind reading this one?
My argument against God was that the universe seemed so cruel and unjust. But how had I got this idea of just and unjust? A man doesn't call a line crooked unless he has some idea of a straight line. What was I comparing this universe with when I called it unjust? If the whole show was bad and senseless from A to Z, so to speak, why did I, who was supposed to be part of the show, find myself in such a violent reaction against it? Of course, I could have given up my idea of justice by saying it was nothing but a private idea of my own. But if I did that, then my argument against God collapsed too, for the argument depended on saying the world was really unjust, not simply that it did not happen to please my fancies. Thus, in the very act of trying to prove that God did not exist, in other words, that the whole of reality was senseless, I found I was forced to assume that one part of reality, namely my idea of justice, was full of sense. If the whole universe has no meaning, we should never have found out that it has no meaning, just as if there were no light in the universe, and therefore no creatures with eyes, we should never have known it was dark. Dark would be without meaning.
Thanks, Steve. This is Lewis's famous argument for morality, which I take to be a very strong argument. Some people don't. But it's this idea that if you have a problem, his problem with God was that the world was so unjust. There was so much pain and so much suffering in the world. How could there be a God with all this pain and suffering? And he realized that if there was no God, there was no such thing as immorality. There was no such thing as injustice. Because it is God that gives you the framework to understand what goodness is. And if you don't have a standard, then goodness is defined by whoever it is. It's defined by your own self. And my version of goodness can be very different than your version of goodness. And this is famously, again, one of the reasons that drove C.S. Lewis from atheism to faith. So there are two major points. I bring up all this not to bash atheists, not to say that you can't be good without God, because you can be. There are many, many very good, many moral atheists out there. And if you don't believe that, you should go befriend some of them. Some of the nicest people you will meet don't believe in God. So this is not me saying that you can't be good without God. It is me saying that you can't ground that goodness in anything. Because as soon as you say, you shouldn't do that, well, you have to have a reason, right? To tell me what I should or shouldn't do. And if the reason is because you don't believe that I should or shouldn't do that, well, I can just say, I don't believe you, right? So eventually, the problem with materialism is you cannot ground anything that is beyond the material universe with it. So, the critique of Christianity from the problem of evil assumes a Christian worldview. Do you understand that? To say that there is no God because there's so much evil in the world assumes the Christian definition of evil. And if you didn't have that definition of evil, you couldn't make the argument. Again, it's not to bash atheists. The point that I'm trying to make, and the reason I bring all this up, is because wrestling with the problem of evil is a profoundly Christian experience. So if you get nothing else from this class, I want you to hear me in this. If you are a Christian and you are wrestling with this problem, you see pain, you see suffering in the world, and you say, I just don't know if I can believe in God in the face of this pain and suffering, I want you to know that that doesn't make you not a Christian. In fact, you're doing the very thing that your Christianity has taught you to do. Because you are seeing the pain and suffering. And your Christianity has told you that that's wrong. That one, evil is real. And two, evil should not be. So, don't give up on yourself. Because wrestling with the problem of evil is a profoundly Christian experience. And if you are a skeptic, or you are seeking something, and you are questioning whether or not you can believe God is good, or God is real in the face of his goodness, I just want to tell you that I think you are closer to Christian morality than you think you are. And I would encourage you to keep going. Because again, I think you already believe the values. And if you have been raised in the West, it is very, and honestly, pretty much, and the Christian worldviews have an impact on most worldviews worldwide today. You probably already believe this stuff. And I would encourage you to keep going, because, again, wrestling with the problem of evil is a profoundly Christian exercise. So the question that we will be asking the rest of this class, which I think is a more important question, especially for Christianity, is Christianity coherent in the face of the problem of evil? And this is a little bit of a different question than we started out with. The question we started out with is, how can God be good if there is pain and suffering in the world? And I think the question that is most trying to Christianity is the Christian worldview coherent in the face of evil? And that is the question that we will be exploring the rest of the class. So we will ask whether or not it makes sense that the Christian claim that God is all good and all powerful can even be logically possible. And then we will dig down into the biblical passages that cause a lot of anxiety because they don't feel good. But again, if you are questioning biblical passages because you think that a good God couldn't do that, that's your Christianity talking. So don't give up on yourself. Because to wrestle with the problem of evil is a profoundly Christian exercise. That's what I want you to get from this class. I started out with nihilism, and now I'm trying to comfort you a little bit. So, in case that's not painfully obvious. So, the rest of the class, we will deal with this question. We will ask, first, is there a logical coherence to an all-good God and the fact that evil exists? We'll spend the next 3 or 4 classes on that. I want to point out that, again, I have built 3 Q&A sessions where we will take a whole day and we'll just answer questions. Because this is not a class where I can answer everything. This is not a class where I can tell you even expose you to everything that I have read on this topic. But I think the most important thing is I want to know what you are thinking. Because your questions are the most important questions. Not what I think is important, but I want to know your questions. So September 22nd is the first Q&A, so be thinking of questions for that. Here are some resources. I don't know if you can read that, but there's a book written by Justin Brierley called The Surprising Rebirth of Belief in God. And it's all on this subject. It's a great book. Honestly, I think you should read that beyond the first one I mentioned, because he discusses this phenomenon and this topic, and I think especially if you are struggling with this phenomenon, this is a comfort, because a lot of people are losing faith in the new atheism, because the new atheism left a crisis of meaning. Their big thing was Christianity can't be true, but in that place, they couldn't give you anything. They couldn't tell you what was true, because again, if all that is true is the material universe, ultimately it is meaningless. The Air We Breathe by Glenn Scrivener. I never actually tried to say his name aloud. Another wonderful, wonderful book. And then Dominion by Tom Holland. Tom Holland is a secular historian who has come to see through his study of ancient Rome and ancient Muslim culture that he himself is profoundly Christian, even though he was an atheist, because of what he lived in, because of the values and the morals that he inherently believed. And he would compare them to the Romans that he was reading and he was studying, he was writing about. And he realized that his values didn't line up with them. And it's because his values come from Christianity. So I don't think he's quite all the way a Christian yet, but he is an important voice in this topic. So that's what I have for you today. Again, you can join the Google Classroom where I'll post these slides and other resources. Sorry for my voice this morning. Hopefully next week we will be all healed and ready to talk about what does the Bible actually say about the goodness of God? Does the Bible even claim that God is good? So that's our topic for next week. Thank you so much.